The Convergence Institute for Advanced Species occupied a space station the size of a small moon, which was appropriate because its operating budget could have purchased several actual small moons. Floating in neutral space at the intersection of 7 major hyperlane routes, it represented the pinnacle of galactic education, where the offspring of senators, warlords, corporate oligarchs, and occasionally genuine merit-based scholarship recipients came to learn how not to accidentally start interstellar incidents. The success rate was approximately 63%, which the administration considered acceptable. For the past 400 cycles, the Institute had refined its curriculum to accommodate the various species of the galactic community, a loosely organized confederation of civilizations that had mostly stopped trying to exterminate each other. Mostly. The key to peaceful coexistence, the founding charter proclaimed, was mutual understanding and respect for cultural differences. In practice, this meant an elaborate hierarchical system based almost entirely on who could beat up whom, because apparently sentient species across the galaxy shared humanity's middle school sensibilities. At the top of this food chain lounged the Krythak, an 8-foot-tall species of bipedal warriors who had evolved on a high-gravity death world where everything, including the plants, had apparently woken up and chosen violence. Their homeworld's predators had predators. Their idea of a coming-of-age ceremony involved hunting said predators with pointed sticks. They possessed 4 arms, dense musculature that could shrug off small arms fire, and an exoskeleton that made them look like someone had crossed a very angry rhinoceros with a bodybuilder. Their military had never lost a ground engagement in recorded history, a fact they mentioned approximately as often as they breathed. The Krythak philosophy was simple. Strength commanded respect, weakness invited conquest, and diplomacy was what happened after you had thoroughly established which category you fell into. They had joined the galactic community not through cultural exchange or mutual benefit, but by beating up the community's champions in ritual combat and then graciously agreeing to play nice with the other species. Their empire controlled 73 systems, maintained the largest military fleet outside the community's collective defense force, and had trade agreements that basically amounted to, "Give us favorable terms or we'll be very disappointed in you." Nobody wanted to disappoint the Krythak. Then there were species like the Vexillian, insectoid creatures with compound eyes and a disturbing tendency to document everything. The Horthaks, amphibious beings who excelled at chemistry and had never met a problem they couldn't solve with the right combination of elements. The Qualics, silicon-based life forms who communicated through harmonic resonance and found biological species obsession with consuming other organisms for energy both fascinating and disgusting. Dozens of civilizations, hundreds of cultures, all coexisting in a delicate balance maintained primarily by everyone agreeing that the Krythak were terrifying, and perhaps it was best not to rock the boat. And then, 3 years ago, humanity had submitted their application for community membership. The Galactic Community's Admission Committee had reviewed Earth's file with the kind of enthusiasm normally reserved for tax audits. Humans were, by all measurable standards, remarkably unimpressive. They hailed from a medium-gravity world with no particularly extreme environmental pressures. No natural armor, no claws, no venom, no exoskeleton, no redundant organ systems. Their homeworld was practically a vacation resort compared to proper death worlds. They had no psychic abilities, no natural camouflage, no capacity for bioluminescent communication. They couldn't even regulate their own body temperature properly and had to wrap themselves in the processed hides of other species just to survive mild weather fluctuations. The committee had very nearly rejected the application outright. But Earth had achieved faster-than-light travel independently, possessed a functioning, if chaotic, planetary government, and had surprisingly advanced computer technology. Plus, their application fee had cleared, and the community was technically supposed to be inclusive. So humanity was admitted with the provisional status of developing species and given access to community institutions, including the Convergence Institute. The general consensus among established species was that humans were soft-worlders, the galactic equivalent of someone who grew up in a gated community and thought food came from grocery stores rather than screaming and running away. Harmless, perhaps useful for technical positions that didn't require physical robustness, and certainly not anyone to worry about in combat situations. The betting pools on how long human students would last at the Institute had paid out handsomely to anyone who had wagered on longer than expected, but still pretty fragile. This comfortable assumption was about to be violently readjusted. The combat theory classroom occupied one of the Institute's training sectors. A vast space with adjustable gravity, environmental controls, and medical bays standing by because academic institutions had learned long ago that theory was a loose term when dealing with young beings who were absolutely certain they were invincible. The room could simulate everything from zero-gravity combat to fighting in methane storms, and the practice mats had been engineered to withstand students who weighed half a ton and thought restraint was for species without proper warrior traditions. Instructor Vexelar stood at the front of the classroom, all 6 of his compound eyes surveying the assembled students with the weary patience of someone who had been teaching combat theory for 70 years and had seen every possible variation of youthful stupidity. He was Vexillian, which meant he looked like a praying mantis, had decided to pursue higher education and develop opinions about pedagogical methodology. His teaching style combined encyclopedic knowledge with dramatic flair, which made his lectures either captivating or insufferable, depending on whether you were paying attention. "Combat," he announced, his mandibles clicking in a way that the translation matrix rendered as professorial gravitas, "is not merely the application of force. It is physics made personal. It is the conversation between mass, momentum, and the unfortunate realization that you have miscalculated one or both." The students sat in clusters, naturally segregated by species and perceived danger level. The Krythak students occupied the back rows, sprawling across reinforced seating that groaned under their weight. The Horthaks kept to the left side, close to the environmental controls they had adjusted to increase humidity. The Qualic students, all 3 of them, had claimed a corner where they could maintain their preferred temperature without making the carbon-based life forms uncomfortable. And scattered throughout were the various other species, each finding their ecological niche in the social hierarchy of the classroom. Near the front, isolated in a manner that suggested either quarantine or irrelevance, sat the human. She was, by galactic standards, aggressively average. About 6 feet tall once you converted from their bizarre measurement system, with brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and the kind of quiet demeanor that her classmates had interpreted as either shyness or a survival instinct warning her not to draw attention to herself. She wore the Institute's standard training uniform, which on her looked less like combat gear and more like someone cosplaying as a real student. She had been at the Institute for 2 semesters, maintained passing grades in all her courses, and had successfully avoided notice by being so thoroughly unremarkable that most students forgot she was there. This was, as it turned out, a remarkably effective defensive strategy. In the back row, Cale Thorne lounged across 2 seats, all 4 arms draped in a display of calculated nonchalance. He was Krythak nobility, son of a war commander, top of the combat rankings, and possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having experienced consequences. His exoskeleton had been decorated with his family's military honors, which was either deeply meaningful cultural expression or the equivalent of wearing your father's medals, depending on your perspective. He was, by all accounts, an exceptional warrior in training and an insufferable person to share a classroom with. "I see the pet mammal is still attending," Cale Thorne announced to his nearby compatriots, his voice carrying across the room in that specific way that suggested he was absolutely aware everyone could hear him and considered this a feature rather than a bug. "Perhaps it is here to take notes for a proper warrior. Do humans even have the hand strength to grip a weapon? Or do they simply throw their primitive projectiles and hope?" His friends made the chittering sound that Krythak considered laughter, which the translation software rendered as aggressive amusement with undertones of superiority. The human, for her part, continued reviewing her datapad as though she had not heard, which only seemed to encourage Cale Thorne further. "I have studied their homeworld," he continued, warming to his subject. "Earth, a paradise world where the deadliest predator is apparently a large feline that humans find adorable? They keep them in their dwellings as companions. They have domesticated predators and made them decorative. This is the species that dares to train alongside Krythak warriors." Instructor Vexillar's eyes swiveled toward the back row. "Cale Thorne, your commentary is noted and disregarded. Perhaps you could apply that energy to actually learning the material?" "Of course, instructor," Cale Thorne replied with exaggerated deference. "I merely observe that some species are naturally suited to combat, while others are suited to support roles." The human still had not looked up. Her fingers moved across the datapad, taking notes or reading or perhaps playing one of those simple games that humans seem to enjoy, despite having achieved interstellar travel. The other students had long since learned to ignore these exchanges. Cale Thorne posturing was as much a part of the classroom environment as the adjustable gravity. "Today," Vexillar announced, deciding to redirect the class's attention before it devolved further, "we will be examining practical applications of leverage and momentum redirection. Combat is not always won by the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes it is won by the fighter who understands that an opponent's force can become their vulnerability." He manipulated the holographic display, showing various species in combat scenarios. A smaller Qualix redirecting a charging Horthax. A Vexillian using precision strikes against a heavily armored opponent. Examples from across the galaxy of technique triumphing over raw power. "You will be working in assigned pairs," Vexillar continued, and the room collectively groaned because assigned pairs never ended well. "This is not a competition. This is a learning exercise. You will demonstrate proper technique for redirecting an opponent's momentum. I will be evaluating your understanding of principles, not your ability to injure your partner." The pairing assignments appeared on everyone's datapad. Students checked their assignments with reactions ranging from satisfaction to resignation to immediate protest. Cale Thorne glanced at his screen, and a slow smile spread across his features, which on a Krythak looked less like happiness and more like a predator, spotting prey that had wandered away from the herd. His partner was the human. "Instructor," Cale Thorne called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps there has been an error in the pairing algorithm? I would not want to accidentally injure a species that has only recently joined the community. The medical bay might not be equipped for human physiology." The human finally looked up from her datapad. Her expression was neutral, possibly resigned, definitely tired of this conversation. "The pairing stands," Vexillar replied, "and the medical bay is equipped for all registered species, including humans. Please proceed to your assigned practice ring." The practice rings were circular platforms with impact-absorbing surfaces, surrounded by energy barriers that would prevent students from accidentally becoming projectiles. Each ring had monitoring equipment, automated medical scanners, and a quick response foam system in case things went badly wrong. Because insurance requirements in a multi-species educational institution were apparently quite specific. Kyle Thorne approached the ring with the swagger of someone who had never lost and couldn't imagine starting now. His friends gathered at the barrier to watch, already making comments about how quickly this would end. Students from other species were also taking notice, the way people slow down to observe traffic accidents. The human stepped onto the platform from the opposite side. She had removed her outer training jacket, revealing the simple underlayer that humans apparently preferred. No armor, no weapons, no visible advantages. She stretched briefly, rolling her shoulders and neck in a manner that suggested habit rather than confidence. "I will try to be gentle," Kyle Thorne announced, loud enough for the gathering crowd. "Perhaps you would prefer to forfeit? There is no shame in recognizing when one is overmatched." The human met his gaze. "Let's just do the exercise." Her voice was level, unimpressed, carrying the specific tone of someone who had dealt with this exact personality type before and found it tedious rather than threatening. This, somehow, irritated Kyle Thorne more than fear would have. "Very well," he replied. "But know that among the Krythak, there is an honored tradition. The first strike demonstrates dominance. It is how we establish respect in training. I hope you will not take offense at cultural differences." Instructor Vexelar, monitoring from outside the ring, made a notation on his datapad that probably said something like, "Student is about to learn an important lesson," but could not interfere without undermining the educational process. The other instructors had learned to recognize these moments. Kyle Thorne settled into a combat stance, four arms positioning themselves with practiced efficiency. He had trained since he could walk, studied under war masters, held ranking positions in 3 separate martial disciplines. He was, within the context of Krythak combat doctrine, genuinely skilled. The human stood there, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides, watching him with the kind of attention that could either be complete focus or absolute resignation to fate. "Begin your," Vexelar started to say. Kyle Thorne struck. To his credit, it was a proper technique. Not a wild haymaker, but a controlled strike designed to test defenses while establishing dominance. One of his primary arms lashed out in a straight punch toward the human center mass, fast enough to be threatening, controlled enough to theoretically pull back if she showed proper submission instincts. What happened next occurred in the space between heartbeats. Too fast for most observers to track, but slow enough for the recording equipment to capture in excruciating detail. The human moved, not backward, not to the side, but slightly forward and to the angle, her body rotating as one hand came up to deflect the incoming strike. Not blocking it, not stopping it, but redirecting it past her in a smooth motion that used Kyle Thorne's own momentum against him. Her other hand had already moved to his wrist, her foot had already stepped through to his center line, and her hip had already begun the rotation that would turn his forward momentum into a very different trajectory. Kyle Thorne, who had never experienced weightlessness outside of controlled zero-gravity training, suddenly discovered what it felt like to have the universe decide gravity worked sideways. His center of balance, carefully maintained through years of training, was suddenly in the wrong place. His momentum, which he had expected to carry him forward through a solid strike, instead carried him up and over the human's hip in a rotating arc that his brain screamed was incorrect. The throw was textbook. Not a judo throw specifically, though it borrowed elements. Not wrestling, though it shared principles. something that humans had apparently synthesized from millennia of figuring out how to put each other on the ground, refined and perfected, and now demonstrated on a species that outweighed the practitioner by 150 pounds. Calethorn hit the practice mat with an impact that registered on the ring's sensors and triggered a medical scan. The mat, designed to absorb punishment from Krethak sparring, absorbed the impact adequately, which meant Calethorn wasn't injured, merely shocked, humiliated, and suddenly experiencing a major revision of his worldview. The watching students fell silent. Calethorn's friends stopped mid-laugh, the sound dying in their throats like someone had reached in and extracted it surgically. The human stood over Calethorn, not gloating, not celebrating, just waiting with the patient expression of someone who had asked if they could just do the exercise. "Do you want to continue?" she asked. Her tone suggested that she already knew the answer, that she had been through this exact scenario before, possibly multiple times, and had developed a script for it. Calethorn's pride, that essential component of Krethak identity that valued honor above common sense, made his decision for him. He rolled to his feet with the grace of a trained warrior, all four arms positioning for a proper stance this time, his earlier confidence replaced with actual focus. "Again," he said. The second exchange was faster. Calethorn attacked with genuine intent, using proper technique and the full advantage of his four arms and superior strength. He feinted with one arm, struck with another, attempted to grapple with the third, all while maintaining his base and protecting his center. The human slipped the first strike, redirected the second, ignored the feint entirely, stepped inside his guard before he could establish the grapple, and executed a different throw that sent him tumbling across the mat in an undignified sprawl. This time, she had used his own grappling attempt against him, turned his extended arm into a lever, and used his forward momentum to drive him face first into the impact-absorbing surface. Calethorn lay there for a moment, recalculating everything he thought he understood about combat. "Stop," Instructor Vexillar commanded, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. He moved into the ring, all six eyes fixed on the human with an intensity that suggested rapid academic reassessment. "That will be sufficient demonstration." The human stepped back, breathing slightly elevated but otherwise unbothered. Calethorn climbed to his feet, his exoskeleton scraped from the mat, his pride considerably more damaged. "Would someone like to explain," Vexillar said to the class, "what just occurred here?" Nobody volunteered. The students who had been prepared to laugh at the human were now busily pretending they had been taking notes the entire time. "The human," Vexillar continued, "just demonstrated the principle I was attempting to teach. Leverage, momentum, redirection, using an opponent's strength and aggression against them. Calethorn, you are stronger, heavier, and have more limbs. Why did you lose?" Calethorn, to his credit, was attempting to process this rather than deny it. "She redirected my force." "She did more than that," Vexillar said. "She has clearly studied Krethak combat methodology. She understood your species' tendencies, your attack patterns, your cultural emphasis on dominant striking. She prepared for this confrontation." The human, looking uncomfortable with the sudden attention, raised her hand. "Instructor, I studied the available information on all species before arriving at the Institute. The community database has extensive documentation on combat styles." This was true. The galactic community maintained detailed records on everything, including how various species fought each other, for the express purpose of avoiding future conflicts and definitely not creating a comprehensive scouting report. "And Earth," she continued, "has a lot of different martial arts. We've, been practicing on each other for a long time. This was possibly the largest understatement in galactic history. Vexlar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Define a long time. Several thousand years, depending on which discipline you're counting. The classroom processed this information. You have been developing combat techniques for thousands of your planetary cycles? A Horthax student asked. Against what threats? Each other, mostly. The silence that followed was the sound of an entire classroom simultaneously reassessing their assumptions about human evolution. Explain, Vexlar commanded. The humans shifted uncomfortably, apparently not enjoying being the center of attention. Earth didn't have a unified government until recently. We had lots of different nations and cultures, and they fought each other pretty regularly. So different regions developed different fighting systems. Some focused on striking, some on grappling, some on weapons. Judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, Muay Thai, karate, kung fu, sambo, savate. There are dozens of distinct systems. How many wars has your species engaged in? Vexlar asked carefully. I don't think anyone's counted all of them, she admitted. Thousands, probably. Maybe tens of thousands if you count everything. The Krythak, who had fought approximately 40 major wars in their recorded history and considered themselves a warrior culture, suddenly felt inadequate. And these combat systems, Vexlar continued, his academic curiosity overriding his survival instincts. Are they restricted to military personnel? No, they're civilian sports, recreational activities. People study them for exercise, competition, self-defense. There are children's classes. Children, a Qualic student repeated. You teach combat techniques to your juveniles. For recreation. I mean, there are rules and safety equipment, she said defensively. It's not like we're trying to hurt each other, usually. Cale Thorne, still processing his defeat, spoke up. Your throws, the way you used my momentum. The Krythak do not have techniques like this. Our combat philosophy emphasizes striking and grappling from dominant positions. Right, the human said. You fight standing up. You've got an honor culture that probably discourages taking fights to the ground because it's seen as cowardly or beneath you. Cale Thorne's silence confirmed this. Humans don't really have that restriction, she continued. We developed entire martial arts focused on ground fighting. Brazilian jiu-jitsu, catch wrestling, judo, sambo. The principle is that a smaller person can defeat a larger opponent by taking them out of their element, neutralizing their strength advantage, and using leverage and technique. Your species, another Krythak student said slowly, developed systematic methods for weaker individuals to defeat stronger opponents? Well, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of technique. Vexlar was furiously taking notes. On his datapad, probably updating the curriculum in real time. And these techniques are widely known among your population? Anyone who wants to can study them. There are schools everywhere. You can watch instructional videos on our information network. It's not secret knowledge. The implications of this were beginning to register. Humans, dismissed as soft-worlders without natural advantages, had spent millennia developing, refining, and openly sharing combat techniques specifically designed to overcome physical disadvantages. They had turned fighting each other into an academic discipline with technical schools and competitive hierarchies. How many humans know these techniques? Vexlar asked. I mean, not everyone studies martial arts, but millions? Tens of millions? There are major competitions with thousands of practitioners. A Horthax student raised a limb. What do humans consider entertainment? Lots of things. Music, art, sports. What kind of sports? Well, there's combat sports. Boxing, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, Competitions where trained fighters— Wait, the Horthax interrupted. You watch combat as entertainment? Voluntary combat between trained specialists? Sure, it's pretty popular. Big events can draw millions of viewers. The classroom had gone completely silent, processing this information. Let me understand, Vexlar said carefully. Your species engages in recreational violence, documents techniques, trains millions of practitioners, and broadcasts combat for entertainment purposes? When you phrase it like that, it sounds kind of intense, she admitted. But we have rules and referees and medical staff. It's a sport. Cale Thorne, who had been quietly contemplating his life choices, spoke up. I have trained since childhood in Krethak combat doctrine. I hold rankings in 3 martial disciplines. I am considered elite among my cohort. And you learned these techniques recreationally? I've been training since I was 8, she said. Judo first, then boxing. Then I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in high school. I'm not elite or anything. I'm decent. Decent, Cale Thorne repeated, the word hollow. Instructor Vexlar made a decision. Class dismissed. I need to report this to the administration and probably several academic departments. Homework assignment. Research human martial arts disciplines and prepare a presentation on how your species' combat methodology compares. We will reconvene next session. The students filed out in unusual quiet, most of them already pulling up research databases on their datapads. The human gathered her belongings, clearly hoping to escape before more questions emerged. Cale Thorne approached her before she could leave. His posture was different now, less aggressive swagger and more genuine curiosity. I would like to learn, he said simply. She blinked. Learn what? Your techniques. The Krethak pride ourselves on martial excellence. If there are methods we have not considered, methods that proved effective against our doctrine, I would be a fool to ignore them. I'm not really qualified to teach, she protested. I'm just a student myself. You are a student who has trained for most of your life in combat systems my species never developed. You have practical experience I lack. That qualifies you to teach me something. She considered this. It would take time. Ground fighting is complicated, and you'd have to accept that it involves positions your culture probably considers undignified. If they are effective positions, dignity is irrelevant. He paused. That is something humans understand that perhaps the Krethak have forgotten. There is honor in victory, but there is wisdom in learning from those who approach problems differently. Okay, she said finally. But you have to actually listen and not try to power through the techniques. That's how people get hurt. Agreed. They left the classroom together, an unlikely partnership that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Behind them, Instructor Vexlar was already composing his report, knowing that this information was going to ripple through the Institute and probably the entire galactic community. The news spread quickly, as news does in academic institutions full of young beings with access to faster-than-light communication networks. By that evening, every student at the Convergence Institute had heard some version of the story. By the next morning, administrators were fielding questions from community representatives asking for clarification on human combat capabilities. By the end of the week, the Community Defense Force was requesting detailed information on Earth's martial arts disciplines and whether humanity would be willing to conduct training exchanges. The human student at the center of this attention did her best to maintain her anonymity, which worked for approximately 3 days before a Newsnet reporter tracked her down and asked for an interview. She declined, which only made the story more interesting, because apparently humans could be humble about their abilities. which was a trait the galaxy had not expected from a species that had weaponized recreational violence. In the combat theory classroom, Instructor Vexillar had completely revised his curriculum to include human fighting systems. He brought in demonstration videos from Earth's information networks, showing everything from Olympic judo to professional mixed martial arts competitions. The students watched in fascinated horror as humans threw, kicked, choked, and grappled each other with practiced efficiency, all while announcers provided excited commentary and audiences cheered. The Krythak students were particularly affected. They had built their entire cultural identity around martial supremacy. And now they were being forced to confront the reality that a species they had dismissed as weak had been quietly developing combat systems for millennia, while the Krythak had been content with their existing methods. Kalethorn, to his credit, threw himself into learning with genuine dedication. He spent hours training with the human student, suffering through the indignity of being pinned, choked, and submitted by someone half his weight. His friends initially mocked him for this, until he challenged them to spar and demonstrated his newly acquired techniques by putting all 4 of them on the ground in under 2 minutes. After that, requests for training increased dramatically. 6 months after the initial incident, the combat theory classroom had transformed. The practice rings now regularly featured cross-species training partnerships, with students teaching each other their respective martial traditions. The Krythak were learning ground fighting. The Horthaks were teaching pressure point manipulation. The Vexillian were demonstrating precision striking. And the lone human student was trying very hard to be just a regular student, while various species asked increasingly specific questions about whether humans had techniques for fighting in zero gravity or underwater, or while surrounded by methane fog. Instructor Vexillar published a paper on human combat methodology that became one of the most downloaded academic articles in community history. It was titled, "Recreational Violence as Evolutionary Advantage: A Study of Terran Martial Arts Development," and included footnotes that read like horror movie scripts to species who had achieved space travel after only a handful of wars. The galactic community's threat assessment of humanity was quietly updated from negligible combat capability to potentially concerning if properly motivated. Several species that had been planning to offer Earth unfavorable trade agreements suddenly decided that perhaps the terms should be reconsidered. The Community Defense Force began recruiting human instructors for their advanced training programs, paying salaries that suggested they considered the investment worthwhile. And in the back of a combat theory classroom, Kalethorn and the human were practicing a complex judo throw. The Krythak warrior now understanding that true strength was not simply about power, but about how effectively you could apply it. He had learned to fall properly, to flow with momentum rather than resist it, to recognize that there was no shame in learning from those who approached problems from different angles. "Again," he said, getting back to his feet after being thrown for the 15th time that session. "You're getting better," she offered. "Your base is much more solid now." "Because you keep sweeping it when I leave it vulnerable," he replied. "Repetition teaches what lectures cannot." She laughed. "That's basically what my first judo instructor said. Except he was less philosophical and more, 'Stop standing like that, or you'll keep landing on your face.'" "Human teaching methods are refreshingly direct," Kalethorn observed. "The Krythak value elaborate explanations of technique and theory. But you simply demonstrate and allow us to learn through experience." "Well, you can't really learn fighting from a textbook," she said. "You have to actually do it. Feel what works, understand why it works." They reset for another repetition. Around them, other students practiced their own techniques, creating a space where species that had previously segregated themselves by perceived danger levels now trained together as peers. Instructor Vexelar watched from his monitoring station, making notes for his next paper. This one would be titled, "The Pedagogical Value of Getting Repeatedly Thrown on Your Face, a Longitudinal Study." He was quite proud of that title. In the broader galactic community, the reassessment of humanity continued. Diplomatic channels were suddenly much more responsive to Earth's requests. Trade negotiations featured better terms. And in military planning rooms across multiple species governments, analysts were updating their threat models to account for the fact that humans had apparently been preparing for interstellar combat for thousands of years. They just hadn't realized that's what they were doing. The irony was not lost on observers with sufficiently developed senses of cosmic humor. Humanity had been dismissed as weak, soft, unprepared for a galaxy full of dangerous species. And all along, they had been training for exactly this scenario, fighting each other because they had no one else to fight, developing techniques and strategies and systematic methods for overcoming every possible type of opponent. They had not been hiding their capabilities. They had been openly sharing them, broadcasting their combat sports, publishing their training manuals, teaching their children. The galaxy had simply looked at Earth and seen a peaceful paradise world, never asking the obvious follow-up question. If there were no natural threats, what had humans been fighting? Each other. For thousands of years. For sport, for recreation, for the simple satisfaction of figuring out the most efficient way to put another human on the ground. And now they were here, in the galactic community, ready to share their knowledge with anyone interested in learning. Which, as it turned out, was almost everyone, because the species that had assumed they knew everything about combat were discovering that they had overlooked an entire dimension of martial philosophy. In the training ring, the human executed another perfect throw, and Cale Thorne hit the mat with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to fall correctly. He rolled to his feet, nodded his appreciation, and reset his stance for another attempt. Above them, through the transparent dome of the training sector, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of sentient species learning to see each other clearly for the first time. Humanity had not changed. The galaxy was simply finally paying attention, and in a cosmic joke that the universe seemed to find endlessly amusing, the species everyone had dismissed as harmless had turned out to be the ones who had made an art form of controlled violence, spent millennia refining it, and were now genuinely confused about why everyone else found this surprising. "Ready?" the human asked, settling into position. "Always."